Income Store live video stream at 560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
This is my gift to humankind. People will pay good money for my knowledge.
On AM 560. The Answer.
Dan and Amy, we've talked a bit about this, but not recently, amid some concerns about a housing bubble being reblown up. Fannie and Freddie bigger and badder than they were before the bubble burst in '08. The Great Recession ensued.
Familiar with what happened.
Of course, Michael Lewis made a bunch of money with The Big Short. But is everybody missing an important piece of the story with respect to housing policy that predated and precipitated the Great Recession? There's a new book by Kevin Erdmann called Shutout: How Housing Shortage caused the Great Recession and crippled our economy. Not Fannie and Freddie, not lending to signature loans, lending to people who couldn't pay back, not the HELOCs to buy the second home that you couldn't afford. So not loose lending that gave rise to more government bureaucracy like CFPB. And not Fannie and Freddie, but a housing shortage, policies that created a housing shortage, particularly in two trouble spots. For more on his book and his research and his perspective, we're pleased to be joined by Kevin Erdmann. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, as I mentioned, you got Michael Lewis weighing in. We've talked to Bethany McLean, who wrote the book on Shaky Ground about where Fannie and Freddie is a decade after the crash. But your perspective is different. Not too much building or too much lending to low-income people, or even much to say about Fannie and Freddie. Restrictive housing development laws was the main culprit. Explain.
Yeah. So during the boom, there were loose lending terms. There was there were some deregulatory things that happened that allowed credit to be loose. But to the effect that had anything to do with what became the bubble, it was mostly allowing people in places like San Francisco and LA and New York City and Boston that actually have really high incomes that can afford to live in those cities to bid up the housing in those cities, and that created the core of the bubble. Now that created a secondary bubble, which was actually a whole bunch of people moving out of those cities because they couldn't afford to live there anymore. And that ends up overwhelming places like Florida and Arizona and Nevada. Now, Chicago sort of didn't have such a big problem as those cities. Chicago does a bit of a better job allowing new building. But yeah, the core of it is actually lack of building. And I think if you think about, today, this housing affordability issue is, it's getting to be a big conversation again. And you think about cities like San Francisco today, people there aren't mad because poor people are moving in that can't afford houses that are being tricked into mortgages they can't afford, right? They're mad because people with high incomes are moving in and bidding up the rents and the prices and forcing people out. So I think we all see that happening today. And really what I found is actually that was happening in 2005 also. And that was really the core of what triggered the whole event.
And so, how does, just going back to Fannie and Freddie and some other policies that perhaps from your perspective at least had a multiplier effect or an amplification effect, Fannie and Freddie, the moral hazard for loose credit and for risky lending that Fannie and Freddie create, how does that factor in your analysis?
Really, I didn't have a strong opinion about Fannie and Freddie going into this project, and really this project for me was sort of an accident of just finding some of this data that seemed to turn a lot of these conclusions upside down, and so I just kept following my nose down the path of sort of finding this new story. But really, Fannie and Freddie were very counter-cyclical. I've actually come out of this whole process with a much higher opinion of them as a public institution. During the height of the boom, they actually were losing market share at a pretty incredible rate to these new, those new private markets with subprime and alt-A loans that were happening. So really, Fannie and Freddie, in just about every way, come out looking pretty good. Their Default rates were low compared to all the other conduits. And really, at the end, what I think happened was they were trying to come in and fill in the gaps in 2007 and 2008 when all the other forms of lending had collapsed. And the biggest mistake we made through the entire bubble was not allowing them to come back in and sort of let mortgage lending, continue to be somewhat healthy. And most of the foreclosures that happened, most of the loss of home equity in working class households, working class homes, happened in that like 2009 to 2012 period. And that was actually a late effect that basically happened because we cut back on lending to the low end. And in fact, extra lending to entry-level borrowers was never the cause of the bubble in the first place.
Well, everyone keeps saying that within the next year or 2 years, the housing market's gonna collapse again. Because if you look at the charts, we go up, go down, go up, go down. Do you think that that's going to happen?
No, I think it's a very different landscape today. And I think one of the things that's really important to think about carefully in terms of housing affordability is the difference between rental value and price. And really, when we think about supply and demand, it's rent. It's the cost over a period of time of what it takes to put a roof over your head, and the home is the service that, or is the capital that provides that service. But a lot of times price and rent sort of move in the opposite direction. And in fact, that was happening in 2004 and 5 during the bubble time. Really what the bubble was doing, even though prices were really high in some cities, and so it seemed excessive, it was actually helping to fund new houses. Since we can't build enough houses in LA and San Francisco and New York City and Boston, it was actually helping to fund households moving out of those cities and building in the other cities we can build. And those households that were moving out of those cities were actually moving away to lower their housing costs. So in most of the country, rents were actually moderating during that time, even though in these pockets, prices were going really high. So it's different today because we cut off lending for a decade to such an extent that we're not building enough houses anywhere anymore. Rents in every city now are going up faster than the regular rate of inflation. So today the affordability problem is due to the actual cost of the houses, due to the actual value of the cash flows that house can create. And so it's the opposite situation. We actually need more houses today, much more than we did then. So we're really not anywhere close to overheating. In fact, if we let the housing market overheat today, it would actually be good, and it would actually eventually lower home prices because eventually we would let those rents start to moderate.
Well, so in this environment, then, where you've got people moving south and west in greater and greater numbers, you see explosions in places like Nashville and Dallas and Austin and Charleston and throughout Florida, Scottsdale, Phoenix area. Are the states that are losers in the migration, like Illinois and California and New York, could they be, or be the repositories of the quote-unquote contagion cities that you described in 2008 that were in Arizona, Nevada, and Florida? Could it be reversed geographically as well in terms of leading indicators?
I don't see, the thing that I think a lot of people missed during the housing bubble was there was a real migration event. And I haven't seen that level of migration yet today. Now, the part of the problem is those numbers tend to be a little bit delayed. So it's a year or two later before we see what's really happening. But the key part of that the migration back then was, it's really a perverse sort of position that we put ourselves in as a country, and it's actually really a key factor in like income inequality and all these things that have become problems in the economy. Is that because those cities have such a hold on housing growth, and they sort of cap their populations, but they're also really the key economic centers along with Chicago to sort of tap into the new post-industrial global economy. People would like to move there for work, and incomes there are growing faster than they are anywhere else, and they're higher than they are anywhere in most, than in most other places. And so we had this perverse migration that was very highly correlated against income. Like people were moving to places with lower incomes, which is really, weird. It's a reversal of any past experience we have.
Lower income,
in a free country.
lower incomes, but significantly lower cost of living.
Exactly. So instead of moving to places with opportunity and, places aspirationally, we're actually moving for compromise to lower costs, but also lower our ability to be productive and to earn a higher income. So I don't see that sort of correlation happening yet today. I mean, we sort of solved the wrong problem, though. Before we were actually partly solving that problem by building houses in other places and allowing people to make that move and lower their costs. Today, they're not making that move because it's so hard for so many people to get mortgages that we can't fund that move anymore. And so they're sort of stuck in the places with high costs. So it actually would, to a certain extent, would be good news to see a little bit of that flow happening again. But the best news would be if we could somehow induce New York and Boston and LA and San Francisco to build houses at a higher rate so people could just live there and earn the high incomes that are available. And as I said, Chicago, at the metro area level, they seem to be doing a decent job. They didn't have quite that signature of extremely high costs, extremely high out-migration, and they build houses at a higher rate than those other cities.
Well, in the last decade, that out-migration has changed significantly in Chicago. Illinois leading the nation in out-migration, and Chicago a big part of that. But yes, I take your point. It's really interesting. I'm looking forward to getting into your book a little bit more. I became aware of it through Tyler Cohn's Marshall Revolution blog, and if Tyler Cohn is intrigued by it, then it's intriguing. He's Kevin Erdmann. The book is Shut Out, How a Housing Shortage Caused the Great Recession and Crippled Our Economy. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. On AM